Hello there, you're listening to The Planet's Memory, where time breathes and the Earth remembers. Close your eyes now and let yourself sink deeper into comfort, because tonight we are going on a gentle journey together, a journey that asks a question so quiet and so strange that it feels almost like a dream itself. What if everything around us, every stone beneath our feet, every ancient structure standing silent in forgotten places, every mystery we cannot quite explain, is actually a whisper from a world that came before, a world so advanced and so complete that we can barely imagine it now? What if we are not the first to walk this earth with knowledge and purpose, but rather the children of something much older, something that rose and fell and left behind only fragments, only echoes, only ruins that we mistake for the beginning when they might actually be the end of something else entirely? Tonight, as you rest and let go of the day, we will explore this idea together, not with urgency or fear, but with the softest curiosity, the kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket and asks you to simply listen, to simply wonder, without needing to solve or remember or hold on to anything at all. There is nothing to figure out, nothing to memorize, only the slow and peaceful unfolding of a story that has been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years, waiting patiently for us to notice, or perhaps waiting patiently for us to sleep and dream and finally understand in the way that only sleep allows. The world you know is filled with ordinary things that have become so familiar you hardly see them anymore. Buildings stand where they have always stood, roads stretch in directions you have travelled 100 times, and the ground beneath you feels solid and unchanging, as though it has been exactly this way forever. But if you were to pause, if you were to truly look at the oldest things still standing on this earth, you might begin to feel something strange and quiet stirring inside you, a feeling that perhaps these things are not as simple as they seem. There are structures so ancient that no one alive today knows who built them or how they were made, and there are legends so old they have been told and retold until the truth has worn away like stone smoothed by water, leaving only the shape of something that might have happened, something that feels too grand to be entirely imaginary. When we look at these places, these monuments, these ruins scattered across continents and buried beneath jungles and deserts, we are told they are the work of early civilizations, of people who were just beginning to learn how to organize and build and create. But what if that story is backwards? What if these are not the first attempts of humanity to reach toward greatness, but the last remaining fragments of a greatness that had already been achieved and then lost, a greatness so profound that even its ruins surpass what we believe possible for people who lived so long ago? There is a calmness that comes from standing in front of something very old, something that has outlasted empires and languages and entire ways of life. When you visit a place that was built thousands of years ago, you feel time stretching out around you, and for a moment, the rush of modern life seems to pause and grow still. The stones do not hurry. They do not speak loudly. They simply exist, massive and patient, as though they are waiting for you to understand something that has always been there but never quite noticed. In places like Egypt, where the pyramids rise from the sand with a weight and presence that feels almost impossible, you can stand at the base of these enormous structures and try to imagine the people who made them. You are told they used copper tools and wooden sledges, that they rolled massive blocks of limestone across the desert using only human strength and simple machines, and that they did this with such precision that even today, with all our technology, we could not replicate their work exactly. The blocks fit together so tightly that you cannot slide a piece of paper between them, and they are aligned with the stars in ways that suggest a deep understanding of mathematics and astronomy. When you hear this story, it sounds impressive, but it also sounds almost reasonable, almost within the realm of what determined people might accomplish if they worked very hard for a very long time. But then as you stand there in the quiet heat of the afternoon, you begin to notice other things, small details that do not quite fit the story you have been told. You notice that the largest stones, the ones at the very bottom of the Great Pyramid, weigh more than 70 tons each, and you try to imagine moving something that heavy without modern machinery, without cranes or trucks or hydraulics. You think about how many people it would take to drag such a stone, how they would organize themselves, how they would lift it into place, and the numbers start to feel impossible. You are told that thousands of workers labored for decades, but even that begins to seem insufficient when you consider the scale and the speed and the absolute precision involved. And then you learn that the pyramid was not just a pile of stones, but a structure built with internal chambers and passageways and shafts that align with specific stars at specific times of year. And you realize that whoever built this understood geometry and engineering and celestial mechanics in ways that suggest not just cleverness, but advanced knowledge, the kind of knowledge that usually takes centuries to develop and refine. And Egypt is not alone in this mystery. Across the ocean, in the jungles of South America, there are stone structures just as massive and just as precise, built by people who supposedly had no contact with the Egyptians, no shared language or culture or technology. In places like Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman, enormous stones weighing hundreds of tons are fitted together with the same impossible tightness, the same mathematical precision, the same alignment with the stars and the sun and the cycles of the earth. These stones are not rough or uneven. They are shaped with curves and angles that interlock like puzzle pieces, and some of them have surfaces so smooth and so perfectly flat that they seem almost polished, almost machined. When you run your hand across these stones, you feel a coolness and a smoothness that makes you pause, because you cannot quite believe that someone shaped this with only hammers and chisels, with only time and patience and human effort. It feels like something more, something that required tools we have not found, techniques we do not understand, knowledge that has been lost or hidden or forgotten over the long centuries since these places were built. There is a particular kind of silence that surrounds ancient ruins, a silence that is not just the absence of sound, but the absence of explanation. When archaeologists and historians stand before these structures, they offer theories and educated guesses, and they do their best to reconstruct the past using the fragments that remain. But often, the fragments do not tell the whole story. Often, there are gaps, missing pieces, things that simply do not make sense if we assume that the people who lived thousands of years ago were primitive or unsophisticated. We imagine them as people who had only just begun to understand the world, people who lived in small communities and struggled to survive, people who had not yet developed the complex systems of thought and organization that we associate with advanced civilization. But what if that image is wrong? What if the people who built these structures were not struggling upward toward knowledge, but were already standing at the peak of it, already in possession of sciences and technologies that we have only recently begun to rediscover? Consider for a moment the way knowledge works. It is not a straight line that always moves forward. It is fragile, easily lost, dependent on continuity and communication and the careful preservation of information across generations. If a society collapses, if books are burned or libraries are destroyed, or entire populations are wiped out by war or disease or natural disaster, then the knowledge that took centuries to accumulate can vanish in a single generation. The survivors might remember fragments, stories and myths and vague instructions, but the deep understanding, the scientific principles, the technical expertise, all of that can be lost, leaving only the ruins behind as proof that something greater once existed. History is full of examples of this kind of loss. The ancient library of Alexandria, which once held the collected wisdom of the entire known world, was destroyed, and with it went countless works of science and philosophy and literature that we will never recover. The Roman Empire, which built roads and aqueducts and structures that still stand today, collapsed into centuries of darkness during which much of their engineering knowledge was forgotten. The Mayan civilization, which developed a calendar more accurate than the one used in Europe at the same time, abandoned their great cities and left them to be swallowed by the jungle, and the reasons for their collapse remain a mystery that we can only guess at. If this kind of loss can happen in relatively recent history, in times we have written records of, then what might have been lost in the much deeper past, in the thousands of years before writing, before history, before the stories that we now consider the beginning of human civilizations? What if there was a time, long before the Egyptians, long before the Sumerians, long before any of the cultures we learn about in school, when humanity, or perhaps some other group of intelligent beings, achieved a level of advancement that we can barely imagine today? What if they built cities that have since been buried or eroded or destroyed beyond recognition? And what if the few structures that remain, the ones we marvel at and cannot fully explain, are merely the strongest remnants, the things built so well and so solidly that even time could not erase them completely? It is a strange thought, one that feels almost too large to hold in your mind. But as you lie here in the darkness, letting your breathing slow and your body relax, it is also a thought that feels strangely comforting, because it suggests that the world is older and deeper and more mysterious than we usually allow ourselves to believe. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world around you is still and your thoughts begin to drift, it is easy to imagine the faces of people who lived long ago, people whose names have been lost but whose hands shaped the stones we still see today. These were not abstract figures or faceless masses. They were individuals just like you, with hopes and fears and dreams that mattered to them as much as yours matter to you. They woke up in the morning and felt the sun on their skin. They laughed with their friends and worried about their families. They looked up at the stars and wondered what it all meant, just as you do. And somewhere in their lives they were part of something monumental, something that required coordination and vision, and a shared belief that what they were building would last, that it would speak to the future, that it would carry meaning forward through time even if the people themselves were forgotten. When you think about the construction of the Great Pyramids, or the stone circles, or the massive temples that still stand in distant lands, it is tempting to focus on the how, on the mechanics and the tools and the techniques. But perhaps more important is the why. Why did these people, who supposedly had no modern comforts and no guarantee of long life, invest so much time and effort and resources into building things that would not benefit them directly, things that would only be fully appreciated by generations that came after? It suggests a kind of thinking that looks beyond the immediate, a kind of purpose that is not just about survival, but about legacy and meaning and connection to something larger than the self. This is not the thinking of people who are struggling to figure out the basics of life. This is the thinking of people who have already mastered those basics and are now reaching towards something more profound, something that touches on the eternal. And there are clues scattered throughout the ruins and the myths and the fragments of ancient texts that suggest these people might have known things that we have only recently begun to understand. There are carvings that show anatomical knowledge that should not have been possible without dissection and detailed study. There are astronomical observations that require centuries of careful record keeping and mathematical sophistication. There are maps, like the Piri-Reis map, that seem to show coastlines and land masses, with a level of accuracy that should not have been achievable without aerial surveying or advanced navigation tools. Each of these clues on its own can be explained away, dismissed as coincidence or misinterpretation. But when you start to gather them together, when you let yourself see the pattern that begins to emerge, it becomes harder to ignore the possibility that there is something we are missing, something that the standard story of human history does not account for. Imagine yourself walking through a forest that has grown thick and tangled over the course of centuries, and as you push through the undergrowth, you come upon a wall, a massive wall made of stone so large and so perfectly fitted that it seems impossible anyone could have built it by hand. The wall is covered in moss and vines, and trees have grown up around it. their roots wrapping over and under the stones as though trying to pull them back into the earth. You stand there, in the dappled green light filtering through the canopy, and you feel a strange mix of awe and confusion. Who built this wall? When was it built? How did they move these stones? And why did they place them here, in the middle of what is now wilderness, far from any modern settlement or road? You reach out and touch the stone, and it is cool and rough beneath your fingers, solid and real and undeniable. This is not a story or a legend. This is something that exists, something that was made, something that requires an explanation. This kind of experience happens more often than you might think, in places all over the world, in forests and deserts and mountains, wherever ancient structures still stand or lie half buried beneath the soil. And the more you learn about these places, the more you realize that our explanations are often incomplete, based on assumptions that may or may not be true. We assume, for example, that ancient people had only primitive tools because we have found only primitive tools in the archaeological record. But the absence of advanced tools does not necessarily mean they did not exist. It might simply mean they were made of materials that do not survive thousands of years, or that they were so valuable they were taken when people left, or that we have not yet looked in the right places. We assume that ancient people did not have the organizational capacity to undertake massive construction projects. But then we find evidence of cities that housed tens of thousands of people, with complex water systems and roads and evidence of centralized planning. We assume that knowledge and technology develop in a slow, linear fashion, always building on what came before. But history shows us that progress is not always linear, that civilizations rise and fall, and that what is known in one era can be completely forgotten in the next. As you lie here, letting your mind wander through these thoughts, you do not need to come to any conclusions. You do not need to decide what is true or what is possible. You only need to let yourself imagine, to let the boundaries of what you think you know soften and blur. Because in the space between certainty and doubt, there is room for wonder, and wonder is a gentle and peaceful feeling, one that does not demand answers but simply invites you to look more closely, to listen more carefully, to consider that the world might be stranger and more beautiful and more mysterious than the stories you were told as a child. There is something deeply peaceful about the ocean, about the way it moves and shifts and covers everything with a blanket of blue that hides as much as it reveals. Beneath the surface, in the cold and quiet depths, there are landscapes that no human eyes see, mountains and valleys and plains that exist in darkness and silence, untouched by the sun. And in some of these places, divers have found things that should not be there, things that look like roads and walls and structures, things that appear to be the work of human hands now resting under hundreds of feet of water, covered in sand and coral and the slow accumulation of time. These underwater sites are among the most controversial and most fascinating of all the mysteries related to ancient civilizations, because water changes everything. If a city or a structure is now underwater, it means one of two things. Either the land has sunk, which can happen due to earthquakes or shifting tectonic plates, or the sea level has risen, which happened at the end of the last ice age, when massive glaciers melted and the oceans swelled and flooded coastal areas all over the world. That flooding happened roughly 12,000 years ago, which is important because according to the conventional timeline of human history, there were no advanced civilizations 12,000 years ago. There were only scattered groups of hunter-gatherers, people who had not yet developed agriculture or writing or architecture. But if the structures found underwater are real, if they are truly man-made and not just natural formations that happen to look artificial, then that timeline is wrong. Then we have to accept that someone was building cities and monuments during or before the last ice age, during a time when we thought humanity was still living in caves and struggling to survive. One of the most famous of these sites is near the coast of Japan, off the island of Yonaguni. where divers have documented what appears to be a massive stone structure with flat surfaces, right angles, and what look like carved steps and terraces. The structure is enormous, rising from the seafloor like a pyramid, and it is made of solid rock that has been shaped and arranged in ways that seem deliberate. Some researchers believe it is entirely natural, the result of erosion and geological processes that can create surprisingly regular shapes. Others believe it is at least partially man-made, that ancient people carved and modified the rock to create a monument or a temple or a city, and that it has been underwater for thousands of years, since the sea level rose at the end of the Ice Age. The debate continues with evidence and arguments on both sides, but what cannot be debated is that the structure is there, real and solid, and waiting beneath the waves, inviting anyone who sees it to wonder and to question and to imagine what might have been. And Yonaguni is not alone. There are similar sites off the coast of India, near the ancient city of Dwarka, which according to legend was a magnificent city built by the god Krishna, a city so beautiful and so advanced that it was eventually swallowed by the sea. For a long time, this was considered pure mythology, just another fantastical story with no basis in reality. But then marine archaeologists began exploring the waters off the coast of Gujarat, and they found something. They found stone structures, walls, and what appear to be the foundations of buildings resting on the seafloor in patterns that suggest human construction. They found pottery and artifacts that could be dated, and some of these artifacts are thousands of years old, older than the cities we consider the cradles of civilization. The discovery is still being studied, still being debated, but it has forced scholars to take the ancient legends more seriously, to consider that perhaps these stories of lost cities and flooded lands are not entirely fiction, that perhaps they contain a kernel of truth, a memory passed down through countless generations of a time when the world was different, when the coastlines were in different places, and when people built cities that are now lost beneath the sea. When you were a child, you were probably told stories about heroes and monsters and magical places, stories that felt larger than life and filled with impossible events. As you grew older, you learned to distinguish between fiction and reality, to understand that these stories were meant to entertain or to teach moral lessons, not to convey factual history. But what if that distinction is not as clear as we think? What if many of the myths and legends that have been passed down for thousands of years are actually distorted memories of real events, real people, real places that existed so long ago that the details have been worn away, replaced by exaggeration and symbolism and the natural tendency of stories to change each time they are told? Every culture on Earth has flood myths, stories of a great deluge that covered the Earth and destroyed nearly everything, leaving only a few survivors who went on to repopulate the world. The story of Noah and the Ark is the most famous in the Western world, but there are similar stories in ancient Mesopotamia, in India, in Greece, in China, in the Americas, in nearly every corner of the globe. These stories are remarkably consistent in their basic structure. There is a warning, there is a flood, there is a boat or a mountain or some means of survival, and there is a new beginning after the waters recede. For a long time, scholars assumed these were independent inventions, that different cultures simply came up with similar stories because floods are a common natural disaster and a powerful metaphor for destruction and renewal. But the sheer number and the striking similarities of these stories have led some researchers to wonder if they might all be memories of the same event, a real flood or series of floods that happened at the end of the last ice age, when melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise dramatically and rapidly, flooding coastal areas and river valleys all over the world. If that is true, then the myths are not just stories, they are the oldest form of history, the only way that pre-literate societies had to preserve and transmit knowledge about the past. And there are other myths that seem to hint at advanced knowledge or lost civilizations. The ancient Greeks told stories of Atlantis, a powerful and technologically advanced island nation that sank into the sea in a single day and night of catastrophic destruction. Plato, who recorded the story, claimed it was based on older Egyptian records, and he described Atlantis as having sophisticated engineering, with canals and harbours and buildings made of stone, and a society organised with laws and government and a powerful military. For centuries, people have searched for Atlantis, convinced that it must have been a real place, and while no definitive evidence has been found, the legend persists, embedded in the cultural imagination as a symbol of lost greatness, of a civilization that reached too high and was punished for its hubris. But what if the punishment was not moral but simply natural, the result of living in a geologically unstable area, or of being caught in the sudden climate shifts that mark the end of the Ice Age? What if Atlantis, or something like it, really existed? And what if its destruction was so complete that only the memory survived, transformed over time into a cautionary tale? There is a quiet thrill that comes from discovering something out of place, something that does not fit the accepted narrative. And one of the most intriguing examples of this is a collection of ancient maps that seem to show knowledge that should not have been possible at the time they were made. These maps are not crude sketches or vague approximations. They are detailed and surprisingly accurate, showing coastlines and geographical features that were supposedly unknown to the people who drew them. The most famous of these is the Piri Reis map, created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis. The map shows the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and most controversially, a landmass at the bottom that some researchers believe is Antarctica. The problem is that Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, more than 300 years after the map was made. And even more puzzling, the coastline shown on the map appears to depict Antarctica without ice, showing mountains and rivers and details that would only be visible if the continent were not covered by the massive ice sheet that has concealed it for thousands of years. Piri Reis himself wrote notes on the map, indicating that he had compiled it from older source maps, some of which dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, or even earlier. This raises the question, where did those older maps come from? Who made them? How did they have the knowledge and the tools to accurately chart coastlines that were separated by vast oceans? And how did they know what Antarctica looked like without ice? If indeed that is what the map shows. Skeptics argue that the map is simply inaccurate, that the landmass at the bottom is not Antarctica at all, but a misrepresentation of South America, and that any similarities are coincidental. But others point out that the map aligns surprisingly well with modern satellite images, when you account for the projection and the distortions inherent in flattening a spherical surface onto a flat page. They argue that the map is evidence of a lost civilization, or a lost era of exploration, a time when people had the ability to travel the world and to record what they saw with a level of precision that would not be seen again until the modern era. And the Piri Reis map is not the only example. There are other old maps that show similar anomalies, that depict places with an accuracy that seems impossible given the technology available at the time. There are maps that show California as an island, which it is not, but which it might have appeared to be to someone approaching from a certain angle without the ability to fully explore the interior. There are maps that show rivers and lakes in the Sahara Desert, which is now barren sand, but which we know from geological studies was once green and fertile, crisscrossed with waterways, thousands of years ago before the climate changed and the desert expanded. These maps suggest that someone, at some point, was mapping the world during a time when it looked very different than it does today, and that this knowledge was somehow preserved and passed down, copied and recopied, until fragments of it ended up in the hands of medieval and Renaissance cartographers who did not fully understand what they were looking at, but who included it in their maps because it was part of the tradition they had inherited. Let your mind drift now toward the idea of precision. the kind of precision that requires not just skill but knowledge, the kind of precision that suggests an understanding of mathematics and measurement and the principles of engineering that we usually associate with modern science. When we look at the Great Pyramid of Giza, we find that it is aligned almost perfectly with true north, deviating by only a tiny fraction of a degree, a level of accuracy that is astonishing given that it was built more than 4,000 years ago. To achieve this alignment, the builders would have needed to understand the movement of the stars and the rotation of the Earth, and they would have needed instruments capable of measuring angles with incredible exactness. We do not know what instruments they used because none have been found, but the evidence of their work is there in the stones, in the alignment, in the proportions of the structure that encode mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio, relationships that appear again and again in nature and in art and in architecture, and that suggests a deep and sophisticated understanding of geometry. And this precision is not limited to the pyramids. In South America, at the site of Pumapunku in Bolivia, there are stones that have been cut and shaped with such accuracy that they look almost machine-made. These stones have perfectly flat surfaces, sharp edges, and intricate interlocking joints, and some of them are made of diorite, an extremely hard type of rock that is very difficult to work with using simple tools. The stones fit together without mortar, and the tolerances are so tight that even today, with laser measurements and computer-aided design, it would be challenging to replicate the precision of the cuts. When you stand in front of these stones, when you see the smoothness and the angles and the way they fit together like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle, it is hard to accept that they were made with only hammers and chisels, with only human labor and no machinery. It feels like there is something missing from the story, some tool or technique that has been lost or that we have not yet discovered. There are other examples scattered around the world, places where the level of craftsmanship and precision exceeds what we think should have been possible. In Egypt, there are massive granite boxes in the Serapeum of Saqqara, carved from solid stone with perfectly smooth interior surfaces and right angles. And these boxes weigh many tons and are far too large to have been easily transported or maneuvered in the underground chambers where they rest. In India, there are temples carved directly into solid rock, not built stone by stone, but excavated from the living mountain, with columns and ceilings and elaborate sculptures all formed by removing the surrounding material, a process that requires planning and vision and a level of control that seems almost superhuman. In each of these cases, the official explanation involves time and patience and the ingenuity of ancient peoples, and certainly time and patience and ingenuity are part of the answer. But as you lie here relaxed and open to possibility, you might also allow yourself to wonder if there is more to the story, if perhaps these ancient builders had access to knowledge or tools that we have not accounted for, and if the ruins we see today are not the crude beginnings of architecture, but the enduring remnants of a highly advanced understanding of construction and design. One of the most calming things you can do on a clear night is to lie on your back and look up at the stars, to let your eyes adjust to the darkness and watch as more and more points of light appear until the sky is filled with them, a vast and glittering tapestry that stretches in every direction. The stars have always fascinated humanity. Before there were cities and electric lights, before there was television and the internet, people looked up at the night sky and saw patterns and stories. They watched the stars move across the sky night after night, season after season, and they noticed that certain stars appeared in certain places at certain times, and they used this knowledge to track the passage of time, to know when to plant crops and when to harvest, to navigate across deserts and oceans. The stars were not just beautiful, they were useful, essential even, and understanding them required careful observation and record keeping and the development of mathematical systems to predict their movements. Many ancient structures are aligned with astronomical events, oriented toward the rising or setting of the sun on the solstices or equinoxes, or aligned with specific stars or constellations that held cultural or religious significance. Stonehenge in England is perhaps the most famous example, a massive circle of standing stones that marks the summer solstice, sunrise with remarkable precision. On that one day of the year, the sun rises directly over a specific stone called the heel stone, and its light travels down the central axis of the monument, creating a dramatic and symbolic moment that must have held deep meaning for the people who built it. But Stonehenge is far from the only example. Around the world, from the pyramids of Egypt to the temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, from the ancient observatories of the Maya to the medicine wheels of the Native Americans, there are structures that demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of the sky and the cycles of the heavens. This astronomical knowledge is sometimes so advanced that it challenges our assumptions about what ancient people could have known. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece and dating back more than 2,000 years, is a complex device made of bronze gears and dials that was used to predict the positions of the sun and moon and planets, to calculate eclipses, and to track the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. When it was first discovered, no one knew what it was. It took decades of study and the use of modern imaging technology to understand its function, and even now, researchers are amazed by its sophistication. It is essentially an ancient analog computer, the kind of device that should not exist according to the standard narrative of technological development, because nothing remotely similar appears again in the historical record for more than 1,000 years. Its existence proves that the ancient Greeks had a level of mechanical and astronomical knowledge far beyond what we usually credit them with, and it raises the question, what else did they know? And what else has been lost? There is a sadness that comes with thinking about all the knowledge that has been lost over the centuries, all the books and scrolls and tablets that contain the accumulated wisdom of generations, and that were destroyed in fires or wars or simply through neglect and the passage of time. The ancient world had great libraries, places where scholars gathered to study and to teach, and to preserve the written word. The most famous of these was the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, founded in the 3rd century BCE, and said to contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls, works of literature and science and philosophy from every corner of the known world. It was a center of learning, a place where the greatest minds of the age came to exchange ideas and to push the boundaries of what was known. But the library did not last. Over the course of several centuries, it was damaged and diminished by wars and political upheaval, and eventually it was destroyed, its contents lost forever. We can only guess at what was in those scrolls, what scientific discoveries, what historical records, what stories and poems and plays that might have changed our understanding of the ancient world if they had survived. And Alexandria was not the only loss. Libraries and archives have been destroyed throughout history, each time taking with them irreplaceable knowledge. The Library of Baghdad, the House of Wisdom, was sacked during the Mongol invasion in the 13th century, and it is said that so many books were thrown into the Tigris River that the water ran black with ink. The Library of Nalanda in India, one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world, was burned by invaders, and the fire is said to have lasted for months, so vast was the collection. In Central America, Spanish conquistadors and missionaries burned the written records of the Maya, the codices that contained their history and astronomy and mythology, believing them to be works of the devil. Only a handful of these codices survived, and they are now priceless artifacts, glimpses into a lost world of knowledge. When you think about these losses, it becomes clear how fragile knowledge is, how dependent it is on the materials it is written on, and the societies that preserve it. Paper and parchment decay, stone tablets can be broken, digital records can be deleted or corrupted, and even when the physical records survive, they are useless if no one can read them, if the language has been forgotten or the context has been lost. There are ancient scripts that we still cannot decipher, like the Indus Valley script or the Rongorongo script of Easter Island. symbols carved in stone or written on wooden tablets that clearly meant something to the people who made them. But that remain a mystery to us, because the key to understanding them has been lost. Each of these unreadable scripts represents a door that is closed to us, a whole body of knowledge and history and human experience that we cannot access, that exists only as a tantalizing puzzle, a reminder that we do not know as much as we think we do about the past. Far out in the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from the nearest continent, there is a small island that is one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui as it is known to its native people, is a place of stark beauty, with rolling hills and rocky shores and a landscape dotted with enormous stone statues called moai. These statues are the island's most famous feature, towering figures carved from volcanic rock, some of them weighing as much as 80 tons and standing over 30 feet tall. They were carved by the Rapa Nui people hundreds of years ago, and they were placed on platforms around the edge of the island, facing inland, as though watching over the land and the people who lived there. The statues have long faces and heavy brows, and an expression that is both solemn and enigmatic, and they stand as silent witnesses to a history that is only partially understood. The mystery of Easter Island is not just how the statues were carved, though that is impressive enough, but how they were moved. The quarry where the moai were made is located in the interior of the island, and the statues had to be transported across rough terrain to their final positions, some of them miles away. The statues have no wheels, no sleds, no obvious means of being moved, and yet somehow the Rapa Nui people accomplished this feat over and over again, creating nearly 900 statues in total. There are many theories about how they did it. Some researchers believe the statues were dragged on wooden sledges pulled by large groups of people using ropes. Others believe they were walked upright, rocked back and forth in a controlled manner that allowed them to move slowly across the landscape. Experiments have been conducted, and some of these methods have been shown to work, at least in theory, but the fact remains that moving an 80-ton statue without modern machinery is an extraordinary accomplishment, one that required not just strength but planning and coordination and a deep understanding of physics and leverage. But the story of Easter Island is also a story of loss and collapse. When the first Europeans arrived in the 18th century, they found an island that was largely barren, with few trees and a population that was small and struggling. The moai had been toppled, many of them lying face down in the dirt, as though they had been deliberately destroyed. The Rapa Nui people told stories of a time when the island was more prosperous, when there were forests and abundant resources, but by the time of European contact, that time had passed. Modern research suggests that the island once was forested, and that the trees were cut down over the course of centuries, used for fuel and for moving the statues and for building canoes and houses. As the trees disappeared, the soil eroded, agriculture became more difficult, and the society that had created the moai began to decline. The collapse was compounded by the arrival of Europeans who brought diseases and enslaved many of the islanders, causing the population to plummet and the traditional culture to nearly vanish. Easter Island is often held up as a cautionary tale, a warning about the dangers of overexploiting natural resources and the fragility of isolated societies. But it is also a story about ambition and creativity, and the human desire to create something lasting, something that will endure. The moai are still there, standing or fallen, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, and they continue to fascinate and to inspire. Monuments to a people who poured their energy and their vision into carving giants from stone, even as their world grew smaller and more difficult around them. Deep in the jungles of Central America, hidden beneath thick canopies of green and tangled vines, there are ruins of cities that were once among the greatest in the world. The Maya civilization flourished for thousands of years, building vast urban centers with towering pyramids and and intricate palaces and plazas where thousands of people gathered for ceremonies and markets and the rituals of daily life. The Maya were astronomers and mathematicians, inventors of a complex calendar system that tracked the movements of the sun and moon and planets with astonishing accuracy. They developed a writing system, one of the few fully developed systems in the ancient Americas, and they recorded their history and mythology and scientific knowledge on stone monuments and in books made from bark paper. And then, for reasons that are still not fully understood, many of their cities were abandoned. People left, walking away from the temples and the ball courts and the carefully constructed reservoirs, and the jungle moved in, reclaiming the stone, covering the plazas with soil and roots and the slow growth of centuries. When Spanish explorers first arrived in the region, they found ruins, but they did not understand what they were looking at. The cities had been empty for so long that even the local people had only vague legends about who had built them. It was not until the 19th century that explorers and archaeologists began to seriously study the Maya ruins, hacking through the jungle with machetes, uncovering pyramids and palaces, and the carved stone stelae that told stories in a language no one could read. For decades, the Maya script remained undeciphered, a mystery that seemed unsolvable. But slowly, through painstaking work and the collaboration of linguists and historians and descendants of the Maya people who still spoke related languages, the code was cracked. The glyphs began to reveal their secrets, and with them came the voices of the ancient Maya, speaking across the centuries, telling of kings and wars and droughts and rituals, telling of their understanding of time and the cosmos and the cycles that governed their lives. The collapse of the Maya civilization is one of the great mysteries of archaeology. At their height, the Maya cities were densely populated, with complex infrastructure and trade networks that connected them across hundreds of miles. And then, over the course of a few hundred years, many of these cities were abandoned. The population declined, the monuments stopped being built, and the cities fell silent. There are many theories about what caused the collapse. Some researchers point to environmental factors, to evidence of severe droughts that would have made agriculture difficult and led to food shortages and social unrest. Others point to warfare and political instability, to evidence that the city-states were constantly fighting each other, draining resources and manpower in conflicts that weakened them all. Still others suggest that the society became too complex, too dependent on a fragile system of agriculture and trade that could not withstand shocks, and that once problems began, they cascaded, each failure making the next more likely, until the entire system came apart. But the Maya did not disappear. Their descendants still live in the region, speaking Maya languages and maintaining many of the traditions and beliefs of their ancestors. The collapse was not an extinction, but a transformation, a return to smaller communities and simpler ways of life after the great cities could no longer be sustained. The ruins stand as a reminder of what was achieved and what was lost, and they invite us to think about the fragility of civilization, about how even the most impressive and enduring structures can be swallowed by the jungle and forgotten, and about how history is not always a story of progress, but sometimes a story of rise and fall, of cycles that repeat over and over again across the long span of human existence. Deserts have a way of preserving things. In the dry air and the absence of moisture, organic materials that would rot away in other climates can last for thousands of years. In the deserts of Egypt and the Middle East and the American Southwest, archaeologists have found mummies and textiles and wooden tools and scrolls that look almost as if they were made yesterday, even though they are ancient beyond imagining. The desert is harsh, unforgiving, a place where life struggles to survive, but it is also a place where the past lingers, where the traces of those who came before are written in the sand and the stone, waiting patiently to be discovered. In the deserts of Egypt, the sands have preserved not just the pyramids and the temples, but also the bodies of the dead, wrapped in linen and placed in tombs with everything they might need in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed deeply in the afterlife, in in the idea that death was not an ending but a transition, and they prepared for it with meticulous care. The tombs of the pharaohs were filled with treasures, with gold and jewels and furniture and food, and the walls were covered in paintings and hieroglyphs that told the story of the deceased and provided instructions for navigating the journey to the land of the dead. These tombs were sealed and hidden, protected from robbers and vandals, but over the centuries many were found and looted, their contents scattered and lost. The few that survived intact, like the tomb of Tutankhamun, have provided an incredible window into the past, showing us the wealth and the artistry and the beliefs of a civilization that existed more than 3,000 years ago. But the desert holds more than tombs and treasures. It holds evidence of everyday life, of the people who lived and worked and raised families in the shadow of the great monuments. There are villages and workshops and trash heaps, unglamorous but invaluable because they tell us what people ate and what tools they used and how they spent their days. There are letters and legal documents and shopping lists written on papyrus or pottery shards that give us glimpses of individual lives, of concerns and complaints, and moments of humour that remind us that these were real people, not so different from us. And there are enigmas, things that do not fit neatly into our understanding of the ancient world. There are the Nazca lines in Peru, enormous geoglyphs etched into the desert floor, visible only from above, depicting animals and geometric shapes, with a precision that seems almost impossible for people who supposedly had no way to see their work from the air. There are ancient batteries found in Iraq, clay jars with copper and iron rods that seem designed to produce an electric current, though we have no idea what they were used for. There are artifacts and structures that challenge our assumptions, that suggest that people of the past knew more and could do more than we give them credit for. As you lie here relaxed and drifting, let yourself imagine walking through a desert at dawn when the air is still cool and the light is soft and golden. You come upon a half-buried wall, the remnants of a building that once stood proud and complete. You brush away the sand, and you see carvings, symbols that might be writing or might be decoration, worn by time but still visible. You do not know who made this, or when, or why, but you feel a connection, a thread that stretches back through time, linking you to someone who once stood in this same place, under this same sky, and who also wondered about their place in the world and what would remain of them after they were gone. Long before writing, long before the invention of alphabets and the recording of history in books and scrolls, there was memory. There were stories passed from one generation to the next, told and retold around fires and in homes. Stories that carried the history and the wisdom and the identity of a people. These stories were not fixed. They changed with each telling, adapted to the audience, embellished or simplified, but at their core they preserved something essential, something that needed to be remembered. In many cultures, this oral tradition was supported by songs and poetry, by rhythms and rhymes that made the stories easier to remember and to recite. Bards and griots and storytellers held a special place in society, respected and honoured for their ability to keep the past alive, to be the living libraries of their people. The oral tradition is still alive in many parts of the world, though it has been overshadowed by written and digital forms of communication. In Aboriginal Australia, the Indigenous people have what they call the dream time, a complex system of stories and songs that describe the creation of the world and the laws that govern it, and the relationships between people and the land. These stories have been passed down for tens of thousands of years, making them some of the oldest continuous cultural traditions on Earth. And remarkably, some of these stories contain information that has been verified by modern science. There are Dreamtime stories that describe coastal areas that are now underwater, submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, events that happened more than 10,000 years ago. The stories describe people walking to islands that are now separated from the mainland by deep water, and they describe landscapes and landmarks that no longer exist above the surface. This suggests that the oral tradition is capable of preserving accurate information over incredibly long periods of time, far longer than we usually assume. If that is true, then perhaps we should take other oral traditions more seriously. Other stories that speak of lost lands and ancient disasters and times when the world was different. The flood myths we discussed earlier might be more than just symbolic tales. They might be actual memories of real events, preserved through countless retellings over thousands of years. The stories of Atlantis and other lost civilizations might also have a basis in reality, not necessarily as they are described in the myths, with all their exaggerations and supernatural elements, but as echoes of something that really happened, something that was significant enough to be remembered and passed down even after the physical evidence had disappeared. Listening to these stories, letting them wash over you like a gentle stream, you do not need to analyze or judge or decide what is literal and what is metaphorical. You only need to listen, to let the rhythm of the words carry you, to feel the weight of time and tradition, and to recognize that these stories are a bridge, a connection between the deep past and the present, between the people who first told them and the people who hear them now, across a span of time so vast that it is almost beyond comprehension. Imagine a continent covered entirely in ice, a frozen wasteland where temperatures drop to unimaginable depths, and the wind howls across a landscape so barren and so hostile that almost nothing can survive. This is Antarctica, the coldest and most remote place on Earth, a place that was unknown to humanity for most of our history, and that even now remains largely unexplored and uninhabited. The ice sheet that covers Antarctica is miles thick in some places, a massive accumulation of frozen water that has built up over millions of years. Beneath that ice, hidden and preserved, there is land, mountains and valleys and basins that no one has seen, that exist in a state of frozen suspension, waiting. In recent decades, scientists using radar and seismic imaging have begun to map what lies beneath the ice, and what they have found is surprising. There are mountains as tall as the Alps hidden completely beneath the surface. There are lakes, vast bodies of liquid water kept from freezing by geothermal heat from the earth below. And there are hints, tantalizing and controversial, of possible structures, anomalies in the ice and the rock that some researchers believe could be evidence of human or even artificial construction. These claims are highly speculative and are not accepted by mainstream science, but they persist, fueled by the knowledge that if there were structures beneath the ice, we would have no way of knowing until the ice melts or until we develop the technology to excavate through miles of frozen barrier. The idea that Antarctica could have once been habitable, that it could have supported life and possibly even human civilizations, is not as far-fetched as it might seem. Antarctica has not always been covered in ice. Millions of years ago it was part of a supercontinent called Gondwana, and it was warm and green and home to forests and dinosaurs. The ice only began to form relatively recently, in geological terms, as the continent drifted toward the South Pole and the climate cooled. But even more recently, just 12,000 years ago, the world was in the grip of an ice age, and Antarctica, while still cold, may have had ice-free areas, coastal regions where the climate was less severe. If there were people living in those areas, if they had developed any kind of civilization or culture, it would now be buried under miles of ice, invisible and inaccessible, preserved in a frozen tomb that might remain sealed for thousands more years, or that might begin to thaw as the earth warms and the ice sheets melt. As you lie here breathing slowly and deeply, let yourself imagine standing at the edge of Antarctica, looking out over the endless white expanse, feeling the cold bite of the wind and the absolute silence that comes from a place so empty and so isolated. You think about what might be hidden beneath all that ice, what secrets might be preserved there, and you feel a strange mix of curiosity and acceptance. Because whether or not we ever discover what is beneath the ice, it is enough to know that the Earth still holds mysteries, that there are still places we have not fully explored, still questions we have not answered, and that the story of our past is not complete, not closed, but open and waiting to be understood. There is a certain elegance to geometry, to the clean lines and perfect shapes and the relationships between angles and proportions that repeat across different scales and different contexts. The ancient Greeks loved geometry, saw it as a window into the fundamental structure of reality, and they developed mathematical principles that are still taught today. But the Greeks were not the first to understand geometry. Evidence of geometric knowledge appears in cultures all over the world, in the designs of buildings and the layouts of cities and the patterns of art and decoration. And sometimes this geometric knowledge seems to extend to an understanding of the Earth itself, of its size and shape and position in the cosmos. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, encodes mathematical relationships that suggest its builders understood not just geometry but also the dimensions of the Earth. The pyramid's base perimeter, when multiplied by a certain factor, gives a very close approximation of the circumference of the Earth at the equator. The ratio of the pyramid's height to its base perimeter is remarkably close to the ratio between a circle's radius and its circumference, the number we call pi. These relationships could be coincidental, the result of aesthetic choices that happen to align with mathematical constants, but they could also be intentional, evidence that the builders knew these numbers and deliberately incorporated them into the design. And if they knew these numbers, then they must have had ways of measuring and calculating that we do not fully understand, because determining the size of the Earth requires observations from multiple locations and mathematical techniques that we usually associate with later periods of history. There are other examples of ancient knowledge that seem surprisingly advanced. The ancient Greek mathematician Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy in the 3rd century BCE, using nothing but a stick, a shadow, and geometric reasoning. He knew that at noon on the summer solstice the sun was directly overhead in the city of Syene, casting no shadow, while at the same time in the city of Alexandria further north, the sun cast a shadow at an angle. By measuring that angle and knowing the distance between the two cities, he was able to calculate the size of the Earth, and his result was within a few percent of the modern value. This was an extraordinary achievement, but it also shows that with careful observation and logical thinking, ancient people could figure out things that seemed like they should have required advanced technology. And if the Greeks could do this in the 3rd century BCE, is it possible that other cultures, even earlier, had similar knowledge? There are legends and myths from around the world that speak of a time when the gods or the ancestors had complete knowledge of the earth and the heavens, when they could measure and map and understand the world in ways that were later forgotten. These stories are usually dismissed as fantasy, as exaggerations meant to glorify the past, but perhaps they contain a kernel of truth. Perhaps there were periods of enlightenment, times when knowledge reached a peak before being lost in wars or disasters, or the slow decline of civilizations, and perhaps the fragments that survived, the myths and the monuments, are all that remain of a much richer and more complete understanding. Throughout the world there are places that are forbidden, places that are locked away or inaccessible or deliberately hidden from view. Some of these are modern, vaults and archives and private collections where valuable or sensitive materials are kept. But some of them are ancient tombs and chambers that have been sealed for thousands of years, waiting. In Egypt, there are passages in the pyramids that have never been fully explored, shafts that lead to dead ends or to rooms that are too dangerous or too difficult to reach. In China, the tomb of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, remains unexcavated, surrounded by the famous terracotta army, but itself untouched, because the ancient historians recorded that it contains rivers of mercury and traps designed to kill intruders. And because modern archaeologists want to wait until technology advances to the point where they can explore without damaging what is inside, these sealed places hold a special fascination, because they represent the ultimate unknown. We know they are there. We know they contain something, whether it is treasure or knowledge or simply the remains of the dead, but we cannot see inside, and so our imaginations fill the void, conjuring images of gold and jewels and scrolls filled with forgotten wisdom. And sometimes, when these places are finally opened, they exceed even our wildest imaginings. The tomb of Tutankhamun, when it was discovered in 1922, was found almost intact, its chambers filled with thousands of objects, from golden masks to chariots to jars of preserved food, all arranged around the mummified body of the young pharaoh. The discovery was a sensation, front-page news around the world, and it provided an unprecedented look at the wealth and artistry of ancient Egypt. But for every tomb that is discovered intact, there are dozens that are being looted, emptied of their contents by robbers who cared nothing for history or preservation, only for the value of the gold and jewels they could steal. And there are tombs that have been lost, their locations forgotten or buried under centuries of sediment and construction. The tomb of Alexander the Great, one of the most famous men in history, has never been found. Ancient sources describe it as being in Alexandria, housed in a magnificent mausoleum, but over the centuries the city was rebuilt and the tomb was lost. People have been searching for it for 2,000 years, and there are countless theories about where it might be, but so far it remains hidden. One of the great unsolved mysteries of archaeology. As you lie here letting your body sink deeper into relaxation, you can imagine yourself as an explorer, standing before a sealed door, feeling the weight of history pressing against that barrier. You know that beyond the door there is something waiting, something that has been in darkness for thousands of years. You do not know what it is. It might be treasure, or it might be nothing, just an empty room and the dust of ages. But the possibility is there, the chance that when the door is opened the world will change, that we will learn something new, something that reshapes our understanding of the past. And whether or not that door is ever opened, the fact that it exists, that there are still mysteries waiting to be solved, is a comforting thought, because it means the world is not fully known, not fully mapped, and there is still room for discovery and wonder. One of the most intriguing aspects of ancient civilizations is the way certain ideas and symbols and technologies appear in multiple places around the world. In cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. Pyramids, for example, are found not just in Egypt, but also in Central America, in Sudan, in China, and in other places scattered across the globe. The designs are not identical, and the purposes were not always the same, but the basic concept of a massive stone structure with a square base and sloping sides rising to a point is remarkably consistent. This could be convergent evolution, the idea that when humans are faced with similar challenges and resources, they come up with similar solutions. A pyramid is a stable structure, easy to build, tall, without requiring internal supports. And in many cultures it served as a symbolic mountain, a link between the earth and the heavens. But there are other similarities that are harder to explain. The Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs and the Viracocha of the Incas are both described as bearded, light-skinned gods who came from across the water, brought knowledge and civilization, and then left with a promise to return. This is strange because the native peoples of the Americas generally do not have heavy facial hair, and so the emphasis on beards in these descriptions suggests the possibility of contact with people from other regions, perhaps from across the Pacific or the Atlantic. There are also linguistic similarities. Words and sounds that appear in languages that are supposed to be completely unrelated, and there are myths and symbols that echo across continents, like the flood stories we discussed earlier, or the symbol of the serpent which appears in religions and mythologies from China to Egypt to Mesoamerica. Some researchers have taken these similarities as evidence of a lost global civilization, a mother culture that existed before the currently recognized ancient civilizations, and that spread its knowledge and its symbols around the world before collapsing and being forgotten. This is a controversial idea, not widely accepted by mainstream archaeology, but it persists because the similarities are real and because the standard explanations often feel incomplete. If cultures on opposite sides of the world, separated by vast oceans and with no known means of contact, can develop such similar myths and symbols, then either the human mind works in very predictable ways, creating the same ideas independently over and over again, or there was contact, either direct or through a shared ancestor culture, that influenced them all. As you breathe slowly and let your mind wander, you do not need to choose between these explanations. You can hold both as possibilities, can appreciate the mystery without needing to solve it. The world is large and history is long, and there is room for many stories, many truths, many ways of understanding how we got here and what came before. The threads that connect different cultures might be evidence of contact, or they might be evidence of the deep commonalities of human experience, the way we all look up at the same sky, face the same challenges, ask the same questions about where we came from and what it all means. Close your eyes and imagine the sound of stone on stone, the dull thud of rock being shaped and carved, the rhythmic tapping that echoes across a quarry or a construction site. This is the sound of creation. The sound of human hands transforming raw material into something purposeful and lasting. In the ancient world, before the invention of power tools and machinery, everything was done by hand with simple tools made of harder stone or copper or bronze. The work was slow and laborious, requiring patience and skill, and an intimate understanding of the material, of how it would split and crack and respond to pressure. The people who did this work were artisans and craftsmen, specialists who spent their entire lives mastering their trade. They knew how to read the stone, to find its weaknesses and its strengths, to coax it into the shapes they needed. They passed their knowledge down from father to son, from master to apprentice, through demonstration and practice, through years of repetition until the movements became instinctive, until the stone almost seemed to shape itself under their hands. And the results of their work, the statues and columns and walls that have survived for thousands of years, are a testament to their skill and their dedication. But there is also something mysterious in the precision and the scale of some of this work, something that makes us wonder if there is more to the story. In Egypt, there are granite obelisks that weigh hundreds of tons, carved from a single piece of rock and transported hundreds of miles from the quarries where they were cut. In Lebanon, at the site of Baalbek, there are foundation stones called the trilithon, each weighing over 800 tons, and nearby in the quarry there is an even larger stone known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman that weighs over 1,000 tons and was partially cut but never moved. These are not just large stones, they are among the largest stones ever moved by human beings, and how they were moved, how they were lifted and placed with such precision remains a subject of debate and speculation. As you lie here sinking deeper into rest, let the sound of stone on stone fade into the background, becoming a rhythmic pulse that lulls you deeper, a reminder that creation takes time, that the most lasting things are built slowly, piece by piece, with care and intention. They were not in a hurry. They worked with the knowledge that what they were making would outlast them, would stand long after their names were forgotten, and that was enough. There is a peace in that, a kind of immortality that does not depend on fame or recognition, but simply on the work itself, on the stone that remains, solid and real, a presence in the world that cannot be erased. There are some wonders of the ancient world that no longer exist, that have been so completely destroyed or eroded that we know them only through descriptions in old texts and the imaginations of artists who try to recreate them. One of the most famous of these lost wonders is the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, said to have been built by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his wife, who missed the green hills and forests of her homeland. The gardens were described as a massive terrace structure rising high above the city, with trees and flowers and flowing water, a green oasis in the middle of the arid Mesopotamian plain. Ancient writers called them one of the 7 wonders of the world, praising their beauty and their engineering. the way water was lifted to the upper terraces through a system of pumps and channels, creating a garden in the sky. But no trace of the hanging gardens has ever been found. Archaeologists have excavated Babylon extensively, uncovering temples and palaces and the famous Ishtar Gate, but there is no evidence of the gardens. Some researchers believe they were destroyed so completely that nothing remains. Others believe they were located in a different city, perhaps Nineveh, and that later writers mistakenly attributed them to Babylon. Still others believe they may never have existed at all, that they were a myth, a beautiful story that captured the imagination but had no basis in reality. And yet, the fact that the story persists, that it was recorded by multiple ancient authors who had no reason to fabricate it, suggests that there might be some truth to it, even if the details had been lost or distorted over time. The Hanging Gardens are not the only wonder that has vanished. The Colossus of Rhodes, a massive bronze statue that stood at the entrance to the harbour, was toppled by an earthquake and never rebuilt. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the tallest structures in the ancient world, guided ships for centuries before it too was destroyed by earthquakes, and its stones were reused in other buildings. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the largest and most ornate temples of the ancient world, was burned and rebuilt multiple times before finally being abandoned and dismantled. These were not small or insignificant structures. They were major achievements, celebrated and admired, and yet time and disaster erased them, leaving only descriptions and a few scattered remnants. As you drift, feeling the softness of sleep beginning to pull at the edges of your consciousness, you can think about the impermanence of even the greatest works, the way everything eventually fades and crumbles and returns to the earth. But there is something comforting in this too, a reminder that nothing lasts forever, that the only thing that truly endures is the cycle itself, the endless process of creation and destruction and renewal. The gardens may be gone, but the idea of them remains. The image of a green and beautiful space carved out of the desert, a gift of love and a triumph of human ingenuity. And that idea is its own kind of immortality. In the high deserts of Peru, etched into the dry and rocky ground, there are lines and shapes that stretch for miles, forming images of animals and geometric patterns that can only be fully seen from the air. These are the Nazca lines, created by the Nazca people more than 1,000 years ago, and they remain one of the most enigmatic and mysterious achievements of the ancient world. The lines were made by removing the dark surface stones to reveal the lighter soil beneath, a simple technique that produced remarkably clear and lasting images. There are birds and spiders and monkeys, whales and human figures, and long straight lines that run for miles across the landscape, intersecting and overlapping in ways that seem almost random but that must have had some purpose and meaning to the people who made them. The question that has puzzled researchers for decades is why? Why would a people invest so much time and effort into creating images that they could never see in their entirety, images that only make sense from high above, from a perspective that they had no way to achieve? There are many theories. Some believe the lines were part of religious rituals, pathways to be walked in ceremony, connecting sacred sites, or aligning with the movements of the sun and stars. Others believe they were offerings to the gods, meant to be seen from the heavens, a way of communicating with the divine. Still others have suggested more practical purposes like marking underground water sources or serving as an astronomical calendar. And then there are the more speculative theories, the ones that suggest the lines were created with the help of flight, either through hot air balloons or through contact with beings who had the technology to fly, theories that are not taken seriously by mainstream archaeology, but that capture the imagination because they offer an explanation for the otherwise inexplicable. What we do know is that the Nazca lines are real, that they exist and have existed for over 1,000 years, and that their creation required planning and coordination and a vision that extended beyond the immediate and the visible. The people who made them were not just drawing pictures in the dirt. They were creating something monumental, something that would last, and they must have believed that it mattered, that it served a purpose, even if we no longer understand what that purpose was. As you lie here, you're breathing deep and even. You can imagine walking along one of those lines, feeling the crunch of stones beneath your feet, following the path as it stretches out before you, straight and unwavering, leading somewhere or nowhere. It does not really matter. What matters is the walking, the moving forward, the sense that you are part of something larger, something that was set in motion long ago and that continues through you into the future. The lines are a path, but they are also a question, an invitation to wonder and to imagine, and there is no need to answer, no need to solve, only to walk and to feel the connection between past and present, between the earth and the sky, between what is known and what remains forever mysterious. Deep beneath the ground in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, there are tombs carved into the solid rock, long corridors that descend into darkness, opening into chambers where the bodies of pharaohs were laid to rest with all the wealth and splendour befitting gods on earth. These tombs were hidden, their entrances concealed and protected, because the pharaohs believed that their journey to the afterlife required not just their bodies but also their possessions, their furniture and jewellery and food, all the things they would need in the world beyond death. To rob a tomb was not just theft but a spiritual crime, a violation that could endanger the soul of the deceased, and so great effort was made to keep the tomb secret and safe. But despite these efforts, almost all of the tombs were found and robbed in ancient times, emptied of their treasures by thieves who braved the curses and the darkness for the promise of gold. By the time modern archaeologists began exploring the valley, most of the tombs were empty shells, their walls still covered in beautiful paintings and hieroglyphs, but their contents long gone. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 was extraordinary precisely because it was one of the few that had escaped the robbers, one of the few that still contained its treasures, and even that tomb had been entered and partially looted in ancient times before being resealed and forgotten. The tombs are more than just burial places, they are works of art, their walls covered in scenes from the Book of the Dead, and other funerary texts, guides to the afterlife that show the deceased making offerings to the gods, being judged, and finally being welcomed into the paradise of the Field of Reeds. The paintings are remarkably well preserved, the colours still vibrant after thousands of years in the darkness, and they give us a window into the beliefs and the hopes of the ancient Egyptians, their certainty that death was not an ending, but a transformation, a passage to another kind of existence. As you sink deeper into sleep, you can imagine yourself walking through one of those tombs, the light of your torch flickering on the painted walls, casting shadows that seem to move and breathe. The air is cool and still, and there is a weight to the silence, a sense of presence, as though the king is still here, still watching, still waiting. You do not feel afraid. You feel calm, reverent, aware that you are in a sacred space, a place where the boundary between life and death is thin, where the past and the present exist side by side. You walk slowly, taking in the images, the gods and the symbols and the stories, and you feel a connection, a recognition that the people who created this were not so different from you, that they too wondered about death and what comes after, and that they poured their hopes and their fears and their faith into these images, into this space, as a way of making sense of the mystery, of finding comfort in the face of the unknown. There are events in the deep past that we can only know through their echoes, through the geological and archaeological evidence they left behind, and through the stories that survived in myth and legend. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, asteroid impacts, these are the catastrophes that have shaped the Earth and the course of human history, often in ways that are violent and sudden and devastating. When a volcano erupts, it does not just affect the immediate area. The ash and gases can spread across the globe, blocking out the sun and causing temperatures to drop, leading to crop failures and famine, and the collapse of societies that depend on stable climate and reliable harvests. One of the most famous volcanic eruptions in history is the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, which buried the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum under layers of ash and pumice. The cities were frozen in time, preserved almost perfectly, and when they were rediscovered in the 18th century, they provided an unprecedented look at daily life in ancient Rome. The streets and buildings, the shops and homes, the bodies of the people who died, all were preserved, offering a snapshot of a moment, a city caught in the middle of an ordinary day that became its last. The eruption was a disaster, but it was also a gift to history, because it preserved what would otherwise have been lost, giving us a connection to the past that is immediate and tangible. But Vesuvius was a small eruption compared to some of the others that have occurred over the course of human history. The eruption of Mount Toba in Indonesia, about 70,000 years ago, was a supervolcanic event that may have brought humanity to the brink of extinction. The eruption was so massive that it threw the Earth into a volcanic winter, with temperatures dropping and ecosystems collapsing. Genetic evidence suggests that the human population was reduced to a few thousand individuals, a bottleneck that nearly wiped us out. And yet, we survived, somehow, in small pockets, in places where conditions were just a little bit better. A few thousand people held on, and from them, all of modern humanity is descended. These kinds of catastrophes are rare, but they are not impossible. They have happened before, and they will happen again. And when they do, they have the power to reshape the world, to destroy civilizations, and to create the conditions for new ones to rise from the ashes. As you lie here, breathing slowly and deeply, you can let yourself feel the smallness of human life in the face of such events, the fragility of our societies and our certainties. But you can also feel the resilience, the ability of life to adapt and survive and to keep going, no matter what. The echoes of thunder fade into silence, and what remains is the quiet persistence of existence, the slow and steady rebuilding, the way life always finds a way to continue. Throughout history, there have been individuals who served as bridges between different worlds, different cultures. These were the translators and the travelers, the merchants and the scholars, the people who moved between societies and carried knowledge and ideas with them. In the ancient world, when travel was slow and dangerous and most people never ventured far from the place they were born, these bridges were essential. They connected isolated communities, facilitated trade, and allowed for the exchange of technologies and philosophies that might otherwise have remained confined to a single region. One of the most famous of these bridge figures was Alexander the Great, who in the 4th century BCE conquered a vast empire stretching from Greece to India, and in doing so brought together the cultures of the Mediterranean and the Near East and the Indus Valley. Alexander was not just a conqueror, he was also a student of the philosopher Aristotle, and he carried with him a fascination with knowledge and a desire to learn from the people he conquered. He founded cities, many of them named Alexandria, that became centers of learning and culture, places where Greek and Egyptian and Persian and Indian ideas mixed and influenced each other. The legacy of Alexander's conquests was a period known as the Hellenistic Age, during which Greek culture spread across the known world, but also absorbed and was transformed by the cultures it encountered. Another bridge figure was the Chinese explorer Zheng He, who in the 15th century led massive fleets of ships on expeditions across the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as Africa and possibly beyond. Zheng He's voyages were not about conquest, but about exploration and trade and the projection of Chinese power and culture. His ships were enormous, the largest wooden ships ever built, and his fleets included tens of thousands of sailors and soldiers and diplomats. The voyages demonstrated the technological and organizational capabilities of Ming China, and they brought back knowledge of distant lands and peoples. But then, for reasons that are still debated, the voyages stopped. The Chinese government turned inward, and the ships were left to rot, and the knowledge and the connections that had been built were allowed to fade. These stories remind us that knowledge and connection are not inevitable, that they require effort and intention, and a willingness to reach across boundaries and to engage with the unfamiliar. When those bridges are built and maintained, societies flourish, knowledge grows, and the world becomes richer and more interconnected. But when the bridges are broken, when societies turn inward or are cut off by war or disaster, then knowledge is lost, connections are severed, and the world becomes smaller and poorer. As you rest here, you can think of yourself as a bridge, a link in a long chain of human connection that stretches back to the very beginning and that will continue long after you are gone. And there is something deeply comforting in that, in the knowledge that you are part of something much larger than yourself, something that transcends time and space and individual existence. One of the most profound shifts in human history was the invention of artificial light, the ability to push back the darkness and extend the day beyond the setting of the sun. For most of human existence, people lived according to the rhythms of daylight. When the sun set, activity slowed and eventually stopped, and people gathered around fires for warmth and light, and the sense of safety that comes from being able to see. Fire was not just a tool, it was a presence, a living thing that required care and feeding, and it brought people together in ways that few other things could. Around the fire, stories were told, food was shared, and the bonds of community were strengthened. The ancient world had oil lamps and candles, simple technologies that allowed for a little bit of light after dark, enough to work or read or move about inside a dwelling. But these sources of light were limited and expensive, and most people still lived in a world where darkness was a constant presence, a vast and enveloping force that covered the earth every night. In cities, in the great temples and palaces, there might be torches or braziers that burned through the night, but most of the world was dark, the stars and the moon the only light in a black and silent landscape. It is hard for us to imagine this now, living as we do in a world flooded with light, where cities glow so brightly they can be seen from space, where darkness has become rare and is sometimes even sought out as a luxury, a chance to see the stars again, to experience the night as it was experienced for most of human history. But in the ancient world, darkness was not a choice, it was a fact of life, and it shaped the way people thought and felt and understood the world. The night was a time of vulnerability, when predators hunted and dangers lurked, but it was also a time of rest and reflection, a time when the activities of the day gave way to something quieter and more internal. As you lie here in the darkness, letting your eyes close and your breathing slow, you can connect with that ancient experience, the feeling of being held by the night, surrounded by a silence and a stillness that is both comforting and profound. The darkness is not empty. It is full of possibilities and mysteries, and the quiet knowledge that the world is much larger and much older than the small lit circle of your own experience. The light will come again, as it always does, but for now there is only the darkness, and it is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. Empires rise and empires fall, and the pattern is remarkably consistent across different times and different places. An empire begins with a strong leader, or a group of leaders, who unify disparate communities, often through conquest, and who establish systems of law and administration and infrastructure that allow the empire to grow and to manage its territories. At its height, the empire is powerful and wealthy, able to undertake massive projects, to support the arts and sciences, to maintain armies and to control trade routes. The people within the empire, or at least the elites, enjoy a level of comfort and security that would not be possible in smaller, less organized societies. But empires are also fragile. They are complex systems that require constant maintenance, constant effort to hold together, and they are vulnerable to both internal and external threats. Internal threats include corruption and inequality, and the resentment of conquered peoples who never fully accept their subjugation. External threats include rival powers and barbarian invasions, and the simple fact that borders are difficult to defend, especially when they stretch across vast distances. And then there are the unpredictable factors, the droughts and plagues and natural disasters that can destabilize even the strongest empire, creating cascading failures that are impossible to stop once they begin. The Roman Empire is the classic example of this cycle. At its peak, Rome controlled most of Europe and the Mediterranean, and it built roads and aqueducts and cities that were marvels of engineering and urbanization. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, lasted for centuries, a period of relative stability and prosperity that allowed culture and commerce to flourish. But slowly, the empire began to weaken. The borders were constantly under attack from Germanic tribes and other groups. The economy struggled, burdened by the cost of maintaining the military and the bureaucracy. Plague swept through the population, killing millions. And internally, the political system became corrupt and dysfunctional, with emperors rising and falling in rapid succession, often through violence. In 476 CE, the last Roman emperor in the West was deposed, and the western half of the empire collapsed, fragmenting into smaller kingdoms that would eventually become the nations of medieval Europe. But the fall of Rome was not a sudden event. It was a long, slow decline that took centuries, and even after the political structure collapsed, much of Roman culture and knowledge persisted, preserved by the Christian Church and by the Byzantine Empire in the East, which continued for another 1,000 years. The ruins of Roman buildings still stand, and Roman law and language influence the development of Europe in profound ways. The fall of an empire is not the end of everything. It is a transformation, a shift from one kind of organization to another, and often the seeds of the next civilization are already present in the ruins of the old. As you breathe deeply and let your body relax, you can think about the impermanence of all human institutions, the way even the mightiest empires are temporary, and there is a strange comfort in that, a reminder that nothing is fixed, that change is the only constant, and that the world will continue to turn long after any particular empire has faded into history. Memory is a strange and fragile thing. It is not a perfect recording of the past, but a reconstruction, a story we tell ourselves based on fragments and impressions and the emotions that were present at the time. Each time we remember something, we are not accessing a stored file, but recreating the memory. And in that recreation, details can change, can be added or subtracted or altered in ways we are not even aware of. This is true of personal memory, and it is also true of collective memory. The stories and traditions that a culture passes down from one generation to the next. In the ancient world, before writing became widespread, memory was everything. Bards and storytellers were the keepers of history, and they trained their minds to hold vast amounts of information, entire epics and genealogies and legal codes that they could recite from memory. There were techniques to aid this, mnemonic devices and the use of rhythm and repetition, and there were places, both physical and imaginary, that served as frameworks for organizing memories. The Greeks called this the method of loci, or the memory palace, a technique where you imagine a physical space, like a house or a temple, and you place the things you want to remember in different locations within that space. When you want to recall the information, you mentally walk through the space, visiting each location in turn and retrieving what you placed there. This technique was not just a trick, it was based on a deep understanding of how memory works, how it is tied to space and to emotion and to the stories we tell. A memory palace is a garden of memory, a cultivated space where the past is kept alive and accessible. And in the ancient world, these gardens were essential for preserving knowledge and for maintaining the continuity of culture. But like physical gardens, they required care. They needed to be tended, visited, used, or they would fall into disrepair, the memories fading and becoming confused, the structure collapsing until what remained was only fragments, disconnected and difficult to interpret. We live now in a world where we no longer need to rely on memory in the same way. We have books and computers and databases that can store more information than any human mind could ever hold. But in gaining this external memory, we have perhaps lost something as well. Some of the intimacy and the personal connection that comes from holding knowledge within ourselves, from being the garden where the past is kept alive. As you drift here, on the edge of sleep, you can think of your own mind as a garden, a place where memories grow and change and sometimes fade, and you can walk through that garden, visiting the places and the people and the moments that have shaped you, and you can feel grateful for them, even the ones that are painful, because they are part of who you are, part of the story that you carry forward into the future. There is a particular quality to ancient ruins, a silence that is more than just the absence of sound. It is a silence that speaks, that carries within it the weight of all the voices that are no longer there, all the people who once walked these paths and lived these lives and are now gone. When you stand in a place that is very old, you feel this silence, and it is both melancholy and peaceful, a reminder of the passage of time and the impermanence of all things, but also a connection to something enduring, something that outlasts the individual lives and remains, as a witness to the fact that we were here, that we mattered, even if only for a little while. The stones themselves seem to hold memory, not in any literal sense, but in the way they have been shaped and placed and worn by weather and touch. A stone that was part of a temple wall has absorbed the prayers and the rituals and the hopes of the people who worshipped there. A stone that was part of a road has felt the footsteps of travellers and merchants and soldiers, has been part of journeys and partings and homecomings. The stones do not speak, but they are not mute. They are a presence, solid and real, and they invite us to remember, to imagine, to connect with the past in a way that is visceral and immediate. In many cultures, stones and rocks have been seen as sacred, as dwelling places for spirits or gods, as markers of boundaries and transitions. Stone circles and standing stones found in many parts of the world were used for rituals and ceremonies, for marking the changing of the seasons and the movements of the heavens. The effort required to move and erect these stones was immense, and the fact that people undertook this effort speaks to the importance they placed on these sites, on the need to create a permanent marker, something that would last beyond their own lifetimes and serve as a focal point for their community and their beliefs. As you lie here, feeling the softness of the bed beneath you and the warmth of the blankets around you, you can imagine yourself as a stone, solid and still, resting in a place where you have been for a long time and where you will remain. You are not going anywhere. You do not need to move or act or think. You are simply here, present, part of the landscape, part of the world, and that is enough. The silence surrounds you, and it is not empty, but full of all the moments that have passed and all the moments yet to come. And you are part of that, part of the great continuity of existence, and there is peace in that, deep and abiding peace. Every journey, no matter how long or how far it takes us, eventually leads home, or at least to the idea of home, the place where we belong and where we are known. In the ancient world, where travel was difficult and dangerous and could take months or even years, the idea of home was even more powerful. Home was not just a physical place, but a web of relationships and memories and responsibilities. The people and the land and the traditions that defined who you were and where you came from. To be away from home was to be displaced, to be vulnerable, and the longing to return was a constant ache, a pull that drew travellers back across mountains and deserts and oceans. The Odyssey, the ancient Greek epic poem attributed to Homer, is the story of this longing. Odysseus the hero has fought in the Trojan War, and now wants only to return to his home on the island of Ithaca, to his wife and his son and his kingdom. But the journey takes 10 years filled with trials and dangers and temptations, and by the time he finally arrives home, he is changed, worn by his experiences, and he finds that home has changed as well, that time has not stood still in his absence. The poem is about the journey, but it is also about identity and belonging, about what it means to be home, and whether you can ever truly go back to the place and the person you were before. This theme of the long journey home resonates across cultures and across time. It is the story of refugees and exiles, of soldiers returning from war, of anyone who has been away from home for a long time and who wonders if they will be recognized, if they will still fit, if home will still be home. And often, the answer is complicated. You can return to the physical place, but the place has changed, and you have changed. And the home you longed for exists now only in memory, a place you can visit but not quite inhabit in the same way. As you lie here, sinking deeper into rest, you can think of sleep as a kind of homecoming, a return to a place of safety and peace, a place where you can let go of the day and all its demands and simply be. Sleep is the home we return to every night, a refuge that is always there, waiting, and in sleep there is no need to perform or to strive or to worry. There is only rest, only the slow and gentle drift into darkness, into dreams, into the deep, and restorative quiet where the body heals and the mind processes and the soul, if such a thing exists, finds a moment of stillness and grace. What did the ancient people dream about? Did they dream of the same things we do, of flying and falling and being chased, of loved ones and strange landscapes and situations that make no sense when you try to describe them later? Or were their dreams different, shaped by the different world they lived in, the different concerns and fears and hopes? We cannot know, of course. Dreams leave no archaeological record. They vanish with the dreamer, and what remains is only silence. But we do know that dreams were taken seriously in the ancient world, that they were seen as messages from the gods or visions of the future, and that great effort was put into interpreting them and understanding what they might mean. In ancient Egypt, there were dream books, collections of dreams and their interpretations, guides to help people understand what their dreams were trying to tell them. If you dreamed of drinking warm beer, it meant suffering was coming. If you dreamed of seeing your face in a mirror, it meant a new life. These interpretations seem arbitrary to us now, but they were based on centuries of observation and tradition, on the accumulated wisdom of dream interpreters who believed that the dream world and the waking world were connected, that what happened in one could influence the other. In many cultures, dreams were seen as a way to communicate with the dead, with ancestors who had passed on but who still cared about their descendants, and who could offer guidance and warnings through the medium of sleep. Shamans and priests would undertake dream journeys, entering trance states where they could travel to the spirit world and bring back knowledge and healing. These practices were not seen as fantasy or superstition, but as real and important work, as essential to the well-being of the community as hunting or farming or any other practical skill. As you drift now on the very edge of sleep, you can feel the boundary between waking and dreaming beginning to dissolve, and you can let yourself cross that boundary without fear or hesitation, because dreams are a gift, a nightly journey into a world that is strange and beautiful and entirely your own. In your dreams, you might visit ancient places, walk among ruins, speak with people who lived long ago, and when you wake, you might not remember the details, but something of the dream will remain. A feeling, a sense that you have been somewhere important, somewhere that matters, and that you have brought something back with you, some small piece of wisdom or comfort or understanding that will stay with you through the day ahead. Time is not a straight line but a wheel, or perhaps a spiral, something that turns and returns, that moves forward but also loops back on itself. This is how many ancient cultures understood time, not as a progression from past to present to future, but as a cycle of birth and death and rebirth, of seasons and generations and ages that repeat, each one echoing the ones that came before. The wheel of time is a comforting image because it suggests that nothing is ever truly lost, that what ends will begin again, that death is followed by life and darkness by light. In Hindu philosophy, time is divided into great cycles called yugas, vast ages that last for thousands of years, moving from a golden age of peace and wisdom through progressively darker ages until finally the world is destroyed and then recreated and the cycle begins again. We are currently, according to this system, in the Kali Yuga, the darkest age, a time of strife and confusion, but this too will pass, and eventually the wheel will turn again, and a new golden age will dawn. There is something both sobering and hopeful in this view, the recognition that things are difficult now, but that difficulty is not permanent, that change is inevitable and that better times will come, even if not in our lifetimes. The Aztecs had a similar concept, the idea of the 5 suns, 5 ages of creation, each one ending in destruction and giving way to the next. We are in the 5th age, the age of the 5th sun, and it too will end, though when and how is a matter of prophecy. And innate does and certainly, these cyclical views of time are very different from the linear view that dominates modern Western thought, where time is seen as moving in one direction from a beginning toward an end, with progress and development along the way. But the ancient cyclical view has its own wisdom, its own truth, because it reflects the reality of nature, the way seasons repeat, the way day follows night, the way life emerges from death and then returns to it over and over again in an endless dance. As you rest here, breathing slowly and evenly, you can feel yourself as part of that cycle, part of the great wheel that turns through the ages. You are not separate from it or outside of it. You are within it, a single point on the turning wheel. And as the wheel turns, you move with it, through light and dark, through waking and sleeping, through all the stages of life, and there is no need to resist or to hold on, because the wheel will turn whether you want it to or not, and the only thing you can do is accept it, trust it, let yourself be carried by it, and find peace in the knowledge that this is how it has always been, and how it will always be. As we come near the end of this long and gentle journey together, let yourself settle even deeper into comfort and rest. There is no urgency here, no need to arrive at any destination or to understand any particular truth. We have wandered together through time and across the world, visiting ancient places and imagining the people who built them, considering the mysteries that remain unsolved and the knowledge that has been lost. We have stood in the shadow of pyramids and walked among ruins. We have listened to the silence of stones and felt the weight of history pressing softly against us. And now, as the last of the lights begin to fade and the darkness gathers around us like a soft and familiar blanket, we can let go of all of it, let go of the questions and the wondering and the trying to understand, because none of it matters now, not in this moment, not in this quiet and peaceful space where you are safe and warm and allowed to simply be. The world is very old, older than we can truly comprehend, and humanity is just a small part of that vast span of time. We have been here for a little while, and we will be here for a little while longer, and then we will pass. As all things pass, and the world will continue, the sun will rise and set, the stars will wheel overhead, and new people will walk the earth and wander about the ruins we leave behind, just as we wander about the ruins left by those who came before us. There is a comfort in this continuity, in the knowledge that we are part of something much larger than ourselves, something that began long before we were born and that will continue long after we are gone. And perhaps in the deep past there was a civilization that rose to heights we have not yet reached, that understood things we have forgotten, that built monuments and cities and systems of knowledge that were lost in some great catastrophe or simply in the slow erosion of time. Perhaps the ruins we see today are not the beginning of human achievement, but the remnants of something much greater, fragments of a world that was once whole and complete and magnificent. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the story we have been told is correct, and the ancient people were simply very clever and very determined, and they accomplished extraordinary things with the tools and knowledge they had. Either way, the ruins remain, solid and real, and they invite us to wonder and to imagine and to connect with the past in ways that are meaningful and profound. As you lie here now, your breathing slow and deep and regular, you can feel the boundaries of your body beginning to soften, the sense of where you end, and the world begins becoming less clear, less important. You are not just in the world, you are part of it. Made of the same materials, subject to the same forces, part of the same great web of existence that includes everything that has ever lived and everything that ever will. The atoms in your body were forged in the hearts of stars billions of years ago, and they will continue long after you, becoming part of other things, other lives, cycling endlessly through the universe in patterns too vast and too complex to fully grasp. In the very end, after all the stories have been told and all the ruins have been visited and all the questions have been asked, what remains is stillness. Not the stillness of death or emptiness, but the stillness of completion, of having reached a place where there is nothing left to do, nothing left to figure out, nothing left to carry or to hold. This stillness is not a void, it is a presence. A quiet and gentle presence that surrounds you and holds you and tells you that everything is okay, that you are okay, that you have done enough and been enough, and that now you can rest. The ancient world, for all its mysteries and marvels, for all the questions it raises and the wonders it contains, is ultimately just a reflection of this same truth, the truth that everything arises and everything passes, and what remains is the stillness, the space in which it all happens, the unchanging background against which all the stories of rise and fall and achievement and loss are played out. The pyramids will crumble eventually. The stones will return to sand. The memories will fade, but the stillness will remain, because it was here before anything began, and it will be here after everything ends. And it is here now, in this moment, holding you as you drift deeper into sleep. Let yourself feel that stillness now. Let it seep into your bones and your muscles and your mind. Let it quiet the thoughts that still flutter at the edges of your consciousness, the little worries and plans and fragments of the day that want to pull you back toward waking. Let them go. They do not matter. Nothing matters except this moment, this breath, this slow and gentle sinking into rest. You are safe. You are held. You are exactly where you need to be. The stories of the past, the ruins of ancient civilizations, the mysteries that may never be solved, all of these are interesting and beautiful and worth contemplating, but they are not what matters most. What matters most is this quiet moment, this sense of peace, this feeling of being connected to something larger and older and more enduring than any individual life or any individual civilization. What matters is the stillness, the rest, the deep and healing darkness of sleep. And that is where you are now, on the threshold, ready to cross over, ready to let go completely and to surrender to the night. Sleep is a kind of death, a temporary one, a death that we practice every night so that when the final death comes, it will not be so strange, not so frightening. In sleep, we let go of consciousness, we release our hold on the waking world, and we trust that we will return, that morning will come, and we will wake, and the world will still be there, waiting for us. But while we sleep, we are gone, not in the sense of ceasing to exist, but in the sense of ceasing to be aware, to be present. And in that absence there is a kind of freedom, a release from the burden of having to be someone, of having to navigate the complexities of existence. The ancient Egyptians believed that sleep was a rehearsal for death. that each night the soul left the body and travelled to the underworld, and that the morning awakening was a kind of resurrection, a return from the land of the dead. This is why they took death so seriously, why they prepared so carefully for it, because they believed it was not an ending but a transition, a journey to a place that was already familiar from their nightly travels in sleep. And perhaps they were right. Perhaps sleep and death are not so different. Perhaps they are points on the same continuum, and the line between them is not as sharp as we like to think. But this is not a frightening thought. It is a comforting one, because it means that sleep is practice, is preparation, is a way of becoming familiar with the unknown, so that when we finally arrive there, it will feel like coming home. And it means that the peace and the rest and the stillness that we find in sleep is a preview of something even deeper, even more complete, a final rest that is not interrupted by the need to wake, a final peace that is not disturbed by the concerns of the waking world. As you drift now deeper and deeper, you do not need to think about any of this. You do not need to understand or to analyze or to remember. You only need to let go to release your hold on consciousness, to trust that you are safe and that everything will be okay, and to allow yourself to sink into the darkness, into the quiet, into the deep and endless sleep that is waiting for you, that has always been waiting for you, that will hold you gently and warmly and completely, with no demands and no expectations, only the simple and profound gift of rest. The world is full of mysteries, full of wonders and questions and stories that stretch back into the mists of time. The ruins of ancient civilizations stand as silent witnesses to the fact that we have been here before, that we have risen and fallen and risen again, and that the cycle continues, endless and unchanging. But for now, for this moment, none of that matters. All that matters is sleep, is rest, is the slow and gentle fading of awareness as you sink deeper and deeper into the soft and welcoming darkness, letting go of everything, holding on to nothing, simply being, simply resting, simply sleeping, as the world turns and the stars wheel overhead, and time flows on, carrying everything with it, including you, peacefully, quietly, gently, into the endless and beautiful night. And so, dear listener, this is where we leave you, here in the soft darkness, in the warm silence, in the deep and peaceful rest that you have earned and that you deserve. Sleep well, sleep deeply. Let the mysteries of the ancient world fade into dreams. Let the questions dissolve into stillness, and let yourself rest completely and totally, knowing that you are safe, that you are held, and that tomorrow when you wake, the world will still be there, still full of wonders, still full of stories, still turning slowly through the vastness of time, and you will be part of it, rested and renewed, ready to begin again. But for now there is only sleep, only peace, only the gentle and endless night. Good night.